Welcome once again to The Sage, and thank you for being with us. This journey we're on is one that is very dear to our hearts. Within the past few weeks, we have embarked on a journey of discussing with you and with some selected guests on set about nation building, about continuing our journey to rebuild our beloved country. We had reflected and looked back on the recent elections, and we had indeed come to the conclusion that despite whatever many of us may feel, that in fact there were many monumental achievements from that election. We had opined that indeed it may well someday go down in history as one of the greatest acts of patriotism in recent times. Because we voted in large numbers. We came out, we voted. We wanted the best in terms of leadership. Our young people came out as never before and voted. Unprecedented interest in selecting our leadership, in making our country a better place. Perhaps the waters are settling, but all is still good. Because we continue on the journey of working together to make our country the great country it really is and should be. And in that regard, in the past few episodes, we also started discussing things we think are critical in working together to build our nation. And we pointed out that we all need to realize that every single Nigerian has an important role to play. It will be done by all of us. Not a group, not a section, not just our leaders and so on and so forth, but every single citizen has a role to play. And so we are discussing within this program and many subsequent ones to come about examples of that, the how of it. In the episodes before this one, we engaged some very important and articulate, interesting young people on how young people in this country must continue and build on the momentum already on ground and do their bit, starting today, not even tomorrow, to build our great country. In this particular episode, we look at another sector of our nation. This time, the creative arts. I have always believed that there's great power, there's great potential in what the creative artists amongst us can do. It is indeed things like music, art, poetry, dance, and so on and so forth that play a great role in inspiring. Somebody once said that if music be the food of love, play on. Because they lift us, they inspire us, they give us hope, they point us in the right and good direction. And so in our job, in our joint task of nation building, this is indeed a time to turn to our creative artists and ask them to use their God-given talents to uplift this country, to inspire all of us, to support us as we come together to work to make our country great. And so, privileged, truly privileged, we on the Sage have with us one of the most beautiful examples of a Nigerian that is wonderfully endowed when it comes to creativity and the creative arts. Stay with us. We will introduce our guest to you. Welcome back to the Sage, and thank you so much for coming back to be with us. Yes, before the intermission, I promised you we will introduce you to our guests. It is indeed a prize guest, but one that is not new to the Sage. He has blessed us and graced this set many times in the past with his presence. It is a real pleasure to introduce no other than Mr. Dike Chukwumerije to the Sage. To welcome you once again. I don't have to this time to do a long introduction.
Thankfully.
He says thankfully.
I'm not one for long introductions, but yeah. I really appreciate being here again.
Dike, thank you for being here. Dike is a household name. I am brave enough to say that in this country, and embodies things so important to us on the Sage. And in this particular series, we're rolling out, because Dike is probably one of the most prolific spoken word artists in this country. You're a household name, but in addition to his talents, which he strives all the time to bring home to all of us, to uplift us with, to enrich us with. Dike is also a beautiful, I say, young man, human being, the kind any mother would be proud to say, this is my child. And the kind any nation will be proud to have, because he's one that has always impressed us by his passionate love for this country. He started it when he was a lot younger, when many of us weren't even thinking about it. Dike has always been there. He's always been consistent. Unity. This country is great. We are all one. All of that and more. And put it out there. So many performances. And that's what has made you a household name. And so you fit in so much with the discussion on the set today, where we're saying, no matter what has happened, we did succeed in many ways with the election. We saw unprecedented youth activity. We still all want one major thing: a great Nigeria, a Nigeria that works for us, all of us. And I am saying that creative art is such an important part of this effort. And so I throw it to you and I say, what do you think?
I agree absolutely that the creative arts are critical to nation building, particularly in the case of Nigeria. And to understand why, we need to understand that change in a country like Nigeria requires much more than policy reform or legal and institutional reform, because of the uniqueness of the Nigerian system or the Nigerian situation. We live in a country where it is very routine to find a divergence between what the law says on paper and how people act. That if you were actually to carry out an audit of our formal legal and institutional frameworks, you'll find them significantly robust, significantly comprehensive. On paper, we have a lot of good laws, a lot of good policies, a lot of good institutions. But the Nigerian seems to have a knack for doing things differently from the way they are supposed to be done on paper. And not just at the highest levels, but at all levels. There is hardly any public institution, no matter its visibility, that you can walk into and find that the procedure, the actual procedure, is as it's supposed to be on paper. And the reason for this discrepancy is that there is such a thing as a Nigerian way of doing things, a Nigerian system, a culture, a way of thinking, of approaching issues.
In Nigerian time.
That we are all socialized into from birth. That this is how you do things. And so only what Nigerians would call a JJC would come into this situation and expect that it will run the way it's supposed to run. Every Nigerian knows it doesn't run that way. If you want things done, this is how you actually do things. And that culture, that way of thinking, needs to change before any tinkering you're doing on the formal laws and institutions can be effective. Because no matter what law you give a Nigerian, the way he or she would implement it will be very different from what you imagined. So I always tell people that if you were to, for some reason, take all Nigerians and move them to the US, and take all Americans and move them to Nigeria, that within a few short years, the US will become Nigeria, and Nigeria will become the US.
Will Nigerians become US?
Because of our way of doing things. So that culture, that way of thinking and approaching issues needs to be addressed. And these are not things that you address solely with intellectual tools, because it has to do with the heart, it has to do with attitude, it has to do with mindset, it has to do with values.
And perhaps culture.
And culture. So laws and institutions sit on culture, they sit on values. It doesn't matter how good the law is, what's the subsoil that it's sitting on? What's the cultural landscape that it's sitting on? And this is where art becomes very, very critical, because art deals with those subterranean issues. It deals with issues of values, it deals with issues of mindset, it deals with issues of the heart. And that is the power of the artist, because we are tinkering with those things. And I always tell people that if you shift mindset, you might find that you don't need so much constitutional reform or legal reform to actually get the country working. Mm-hmm. Because many of the legal and institutional tools are there. Mm-hmm. But the person that has to use those tools needs to be reconditioned.
Absolutely.
And that is where art is so, so important. So that when we talk about justice, or when we talk about fairness, or when we talk about integrity, it is the job of the artist to take these concepts and turn them from dry intellectual theories or concepts that people read on paper and make them emotive, an emotive concept that people desire, that people becomes relevant to people. So an artist is able to make a concept come alive in society so that people are able to then see why they need to practice it rather than just have it as a tool in their intellectual kitty.
On a sheet of paper or on the web. I think that is so profound. Let me say that many years ago, I thought to myself that the problem with Nigeria, we also often say the problem is insufficient patriotism. Mm-hmm. That if we were really patriotic and loved our country, then we will feel obliged, we will feel passionate about doing things that would progress this country. And therefore, I think you're so right. It is emotive. Patriotism, passion, is an emotion.
Absolutely.
Emotion, therefore, capable of being stirred and driven in the right direction because we feel love, we feel commitment, and so on and so forth. So absolutely, it is about emotion, it is emotive, and like you're saying, art is very much...
Very, very important. In fact, it's something I often engage with people about, the very concept of patriotism. Like you said, patriotism is first of all an emotion. First of all, an emotion. It's not, it's like, indeed, very simply, patriotism is love for your country. And love always has an emotional profile. It has emotional roots. You cannot order someone to love you. You can order somebody to do something, but you can't order them to love you. So patriotism is not something you can tell people to do. You have to inspire patriotism in people.
Absolutely.
And the way people fall in love with each other is the same way they fall in love with a country. You fall in love with someone by focusing on attributes about them that are attractive. And the same thing with a country. To inspire people to love a country, you need to point out to them the qualities of that country that are attractive. And these are some of the narratives we've grown up with over the years, that we only talk about Nigeria in a negative sense.
Absolutely.
So we are very, very conscious of the weaknesses, of the shortcomings of our country. But we are not as conscious of its positives and of its strengths and of its potential. And one of the jobs of the artist, one of the things that an artist can do to help people love their country. Like I said, I can't make you love Nigeria. I can't order you to love Nigeria. But as an artist, I can inspire you to love Nigeria by painting a picture, by showing you things about Nigeria that you gloss over, you ignore, you probably didn't know, because it's part of that culture that I was talking about, for us to be toxic, for us to be negative in our assessments of our country. And that is just not a healthy environment. Even if you want to dismiss Nigeria, first of all, take into account her considerable strength and potential. You can't come to a conclusion about Nigeria when you haven't weighed both sides of the scale, where all you focus on is the negatives, because that's all that you're fed with every day. I mean, go into any bus or a conversation starter in Nigeria, just look at the person beside you and say, this country now, wow. And immediately they will begin to vomit. No roads, no lights, everybody you can talk for hours just with this country now, wow. But if you ask somebody, can you tell me something that Nigeria has done for you for which you are grateful? It takes that question, they stop and start thinking. Because the brain is not used to thinking about that. Can you tell me things about Nigeria that make you proud, that you can boast on the public stage on account of what your country has done? Can you tell me things about Nigeria that you would miss if you lived in another country? Would you be able to begin to just flow to answer those questions? But if I ask you, what do you hate about Nigeria? What irritates you about Nigeria? You don't need any prompting. You don't need any preparation. You can begin to flow for hours.
To agree with you, it was said that where you see 2 or 3 Nigerians gathered, they're probably discussing the problems with Nigeria.
Yeah.
And I was shocked too when I came. I worked for many years internationally abroad. And when I came to realize that, even there in our expatriate setting, that when 2 or 3 Nigerians meet each other and are talking, we again begin to discuss the problems with Nigeria. And I also then was struck by the fact that no other, particularly African country, ever did that. You could never get the other countries, Kenya, name it, and so on and so forth, together talking about what is wrong with their country in front of you. But we Nigerians are forever doing that. Yeah. And yet, in reality, we're much greater than most of those countries.
Yeah. It's, like I said, it's socialization. It's the way we were raised. We were raised, it's like having a dysfunctional relationship where people love each other, but the only language for expression is insult and abuse. They never learned how to use any other way of showing concern. Because it's passion that drives Nigerians to talk about Nigeria. It's the passion they have for the country.
It's actually the passion, the love, the concern for the country that makes them talk about.
It just comes out in toxic ways because it's the only language we've learned. It's just like the only language Nigerians know for analyzing their socioeconomic condition or their condition of life is a tribalistic language. So they would blame poverty on Fulani people, or they would blame insecurity on Muslims. But they don't have any other language for analyzing their condition. So poverty may be caused by bad governance or bad policy, but we don't have the tools for saying that. Instead, you say it's because an Hausa man is in office. But it's not because an Hausa man is in office. It's the policy that he has and his faithfulness in implementing that policy that is the problem.
Dike, hold your thought. Let me just tell you how profound, how true what you just said. A friend of mine recently was having problems with her tenant in her house. And the way she handled it was to say, he's a bad tenant, a difficult, because he's an Igbo man. If it wasn't an Igbo man I put there now, he wouldn't be a bad tenant. And that is striking, you see. That is the way we handle it. Absolutely. By pitching on where they come from as the reason for the bad behavior.
Yeah. It's orientation. It's simply orientation. It's like in the olden days, things are not going well in my house. I begin to look around for a witch. Or I'm ill, I've been treating myself, it's not working. It must be witchcraft from the village. Because this is the thinking. There are other situations where somebody might start thinking, no, maybe I need to run different tests. There must be a rational explanation. But when you've been oriented a certain way, if things are not going well, you look around for who is the stranger, who is the other, who can be the cause of this problem. It must be the other tribe or the other religion. So all these things are mindset issues. We're not dealing with problems that are peculiar. We're not dealing with problems that other societies, other nations have not dealt with and overcome, are not dealing with, but the way we have been oriented to deal with our problems is through the lens of ethnocentrism, religious bigotry, things like that. So those are the things we're used to dealing with our problems. And you need a mindset shift. You need somebody to say, look, it's the same situation, but there is another way of looking at it. Maybe we're not able to move past this because we're using the wrong tools to deal with this problem. Mm-hmm. There is a different set of mental tools you can use to address this same issue. So maybe your tenant is being so unruly because there's no light, or they've been asking you for so long to fix the water and you haven't fixed the water. Maybe there are other issues that you're blind to, you're not seeing. And being mentally blind is as acute as being physically blind. It's also a disability. Many Nigerians have they don't see the other reason why somebody can be acting this way. They just think it must be their religion or their tribe. And the job of the artist is to make you see, to make things that have always been in the room appear, because you've been conditioned to not see them. You can walk into this room and not see certain things because of what you're focused on. And the job of the artist is simply to say, hey, there's also a table in here. There's also a chair. There's also a bed. There are also pictures in here. It's not just this thing you're obsessed with. And so art is critical in a situation like we are in Nigeria, where the heart of our problem is our mind. There is no alien class that is holding Nigerians down. This is not a military system where you say, oh, that is the military is our problem. It's not a colonial system where you say, no. In Nigeria, the oppressor is also the oppressed. Because somebody who is being oppressed as a non-indigene in another state will travel to his state and become the oppressive indigene. It's the same person that is both the villain and, the victor, if you like. It's all in our minds. Our chains are in our minds. Or a huge part of it is in our minds, the way we think about situations.
Let me take you up, Dike. I'm going to ask you now to reflect a little. As the great performance artist you are, and perhaps share with us one or two of your products where you have tried to do that influence thinking into the right direction. I can think of a few. I've listened to you, but let me, where you have used, whether it's poetry or spoken words or whatever, for that positive reorientation.
Oh, it's my entire body of work. I haven't done anything that didn't have social connotation in a long time, because it's my passion. I did The Wall and the Bridge, a poem titled The Wall and the Bridge, because I was reflecting on the irony of Nigerians who are very vocal whenever they experience any type of racism. A Nigerian is one species of black person you don't want to mess with when it comes to racism, because we don't take it sitting down. we're very, very strong on, look, you don't discriminate against me on the basis of my color. And yet
I'm going to make you say that poem to us. You won't get away with just, we want to hear it, and then we will continue to hear your analysis of it and the reason behind it.
It's a long poem, and I haven't done it in a while. If a white man turned and called me nigger, my blood would boil in righteous anger, for the evil of discrimination is clearly established when a white man tries to treat me like rubbish. But if Hausas say Igbos are greedy and crude, and Igbos say Hausas are haughty and rude, and Ijaw says Ishekiri must die today, and Ezra tells Ezilo there's no other way, if Yorubas declare it is Awo or nothing, and we use federal character to share everything, so before you can even smile and tell me welcome, you must first ask me where my father is from. If those who were settlers but now indigents say those who are settlers can't become indigents, and the Constitution says we are all citizens, but local governments keep issuing certificates of origin. If my brother passed JAMB but can't go to uni because he is Steve and he's not Kanuri, and Unimate has a quota for its catchment area, so he must go back to Benue or wait one more year. If it's okay to say it's not okay to marry someone just because they are Kalabari and that every tribe should have its own side, are we not then practicing apartheid? If you cannot buy land unless you're a native, and cannot find work unless you're a native, and cannot feel safe unless you're a native, how can we then say we're not primitive? Yet you go to London and get their passport, then settle wherever, however you want. You stand there and fight for equality, but come back and start to use ethnicity. I don't get the logic of thinking it's different. To be tribalistic and then to be racist. If you're happy to judge him just hearing his name, whatever you call it, my friend, is the same.
That is beautiful, and that there's so much truth in that, and does indeed demonstrate the power of wisdom and art.
Yeah.